Hi there, and welcome to the Defender podcast. I'm Amy Barrilleaux. The Defender is powered by Clean Wisconsin, your environmental voice since 1970. The EPA made headlines recently, not for protecting the environment, as its name might imply, but for approving a new group of pesticides containing the toxic forever chemicals PFAS. The move sparked outrage almost immediately, forcing the EPA to call it fake news and claim the chemicals aren't really PFAS at all. On this episode, a look at what could be sprayed on food and farm fields all around us, plus a bit of Wisconsin history that offers some hope as we confront a new batch of toxic chemicals. That's right now on The Defender. 55 years ago, Wisconsin became the first state to ban DDT. The toxic pesticide was killing birds, threatening to drive the peregrine falcon, bald eagle, and countless other species to extinction. But Wisconsinites like activist Lori Otto and UW-Madison researcher Joseph Hickey sounded the alarm, pushed hard for a ban, and they got it from the legislature a full 2 years before the federal government would finally act. Fast forward to today, and another battle is here. Joining me is Clean Wisconsin Water and Agriculture Program Director, Sara Walling. Sara, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
So I want to start with those chemicals that were just approved by the EPA. Are they PFAS? Are they not PFAS? Or what are they? Are they fake news? I don't know.
It's a really good question and a hard one to answer. It really depends on who you ask. The majority of the scientific community still does consider the single fluorinated compounds, which are the 5 that were included in these pesticides that have been approved since the beginning of 2025, that those pesticide types would be included in the PFAS definition. Unfortunately, though, the EPA, actually under the Biden administration, had defined what is included as a PFAS chemical and excluded these ones. So there is this loophole that was generated where the EPA has a different definition of what PFAS chemicals are than a lot of the other scientific community.
And I guess the EPA was looking at it as like these are tiny, so we're just going to consider them a totally different thing.
That's true, and certainly our vantage point is that that's the wrong direction to go. I think we've been doing as a world, but a lot more investigations into what are PFAS, what are their potential impacts to human health, to ecological health, all of those things. And so now does not seem like the right time to be approving additional chemicals to be used broadly and widely in our agricultural settings until we can really get a firmer handle on the science around PFAS degradation chemicals, and how long they persist in our environment.
I know there's like a real, I think, public outrage when this announcement happened that the EPA had approved these chemicals, but the reality is, I think that maybe people don't realize, is PFAS are already being spread through pesticides. Like, this is not the first time PFAS have shown up in pesticides.
That's very true. We've known that PFAS have a part to play within pesticides for a number of years. It both leaches out of some of the fluorinated plastic containers that pesticides live in and when they aren't being used, as well as pesticide compounds are found in the inert ingredients of a pesticide. So pesticides have active ingredients, which are the chemicals that are designed and in there to impact that bug or that weed or whatnot, kill those unwanted pests. But the inert ingredients are actually usually more of the concentration. They take up more of that pesticide chemical composition, but they're labeled as inert, and there's a lot fewer regulations around both reporting what those inert ingredients are, not to mention taking a closer look at what the potential health and ecological implications might be.
So, when you hear, okay, toxic PFAS are being sprayed basically on our foods. So the most recent batch that was approved, that gets sprayed on all kinds of food like tomatoes, corn, cotton, broccoli, spinach, soybeans, all the things. I think that brings up 2 worries. First off is, the stuff I'm going to eat. So if I try to be healthy and eat a lot of fruits and vegetables, maybe there's going to be PFAS on those now. And then secondly, if you live near a farm and this is Wisconsin, should you be worried that PFAS and potentially other kind of toxic chemicals are all around you?
Well, pesticides are being applied, ubiquitously in all agriculture settings, like you mentioned. We in the state right now have over 13,000 pesticide chemicals that are
Hold up, 13,000? I mean, that's how do you even get your head around that? Or let alone regulate, but just kind of even understand what's happening.
Well, as a state, we rely heavily on the federal government and our EPA to really do a lot of that watchdogging for us. They, in theory, should be conducting long, term rigorous studies to understand what the human health and ecological impacts of these chemicals are before they release them and approve them for use. So Wisconsin is no different than many other states that rely fully on the EPA's process to understand those health implications. So our state isn't even in a position right now to be able to deny the use of these pesticides because they were already pre-approved by the EPA. We don't have a system in place by which we can do an independent assessment of the ecological or human health implications of these chemicals that are approved for use.
So potentially 13,000 chemicals could be being used basically all around us on our food, on our landscapes. I think everybody feels kind of worried when they hear that. So then how is it that we don't have any mechanisms to do anything about it?
Well, there's certainly a lot of restrictions, and there are certifications that pesticide applicators more often than not need to align with. So there's training and a lot of education and other requirements that limit the ability for certain chemicals to be applied by people who don't receive those trainings. So there are some sidebars for those 13,000 pesticide products and where they're used, how much they're used. The labels, in theory, on each of these chemicals are also intended to be this prescription for how much you can apply to a landscape, my backyard, or an agricultural field for that matter, and ideally really reduce the risk of potential human health or ecological implications. Now, that requires people to read the label and follow directions, and that isn't necessarily always going to be the case.
I do want to say, I talked about farms just now, but pesticides and herbicides are kind of used everywhere. I've seen, people spraying the cracks in the sidewalk to, spraying all of our lawns and golf courses and places like that. So I think it kind of brings a shared blame, I guess, or a shared responsibility to deal with these things. When you say we look at the EPA for guidance, it feels like the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, has changed a lot here under the Trump administration. I know Lee Zeldin, the EPA director, listed some priorities, and among them were unleashing the power of AI, which is not exactly what we would think of environmental protection or having anything to do with that. So what is happening at the EPA, the agency that we look to protect us, as these 13,000 chemicals are kind of out there, that's making it, I think, maybe a little bit harder to feel safe?
You're right. I think this last year has really demonstrated a change in the power structure that the federal government does or doesn't have when it comes to overseeing our public health and welfare, when it comes to the environment and environmental chemicals like this. The administration that we have in place now has appointed mainly individuals that have led chemical companies in the past, and the exact companies that produce a lot of these chemicals that we're talking about in these pesticides. They're inherently stacking the deck in their favor to be able to have some of these move through. Similarly, while the rest of the government was shut down and while the EPA's science divisions were really decimated with the reductions in force that have taken place over the last several months, the pesticide registry division within EPA has remained strong and intact. So it really just demonstrates, I think, where the current administration is placing its energy and continuing to put people in place to make sure that those engines and those cogs continue to turn while the science components of the people that would be doing a lot of these evaluations and really digging into animal ecological and human health studies to understand the potential risks of exposure and whatnot, those groups have really been cut way back. And so it's really an imbalance in the focus on our public health and chemical approvals.
As I mentioned at the top of the show, Wisconsin was once a leader here. We were the first state to ban DDT, famously. And DDT had taken us to the brink of some real ecological disaster. And here we are. We've recovered from that. We can see bald eagles and peregrine falcons around Wisconsin, and that's a true, success story. So, what needs to happen now, I guess, to get that success back? I mean, and if you think back to 1970, that was before the EPA. That was like the year the EPA was created. So it was before we had the EPA to look to for guidance. It was, in fact, the first year that Clean Wisconsin ever started under the name Environmental Decade. So a long time ago, like the birth of the environmental movement, and you had just regular old people coming out and saying, we need to do something about this. How do we kind of get to that place again?
Well, I don't think that Wisconsin has lost its conservation or environmental legacy. I think we really do have that built into our DNA as Wisconsinites. And I look to, the people that we interact with through my role here at Clean Wisconsin, all of the people who call us with concerns that we're able to, have discussions with about all of these risks. There's a lot of those individuals out there that really care a lot about certainly their own personal and family's health, but our environment. And it really does, that's what it took back in the 1970s, was a really strong outcry by the public to say enough is enough. We need to do more to protect our public health and our environments for generations to come, so that we have these lakes that we feel comfortable swimming in, so that we have water that we feel confident in drinking, that we have air that we feel like we can breathe without masks on all the time. But it really does take every one of us taking both an individual step at our homes. So your mention of how can you reduce pesticide use within your own environments, your own choices, and then taking that a step further by contacting your local units of government. What is your county or your city doing to reduce use of pesticides in public properties, publicly managed properties? Same idea at the state. Contact your legislators and let them know that pesticides are a concern for you and that you'd like to see them doing more to protect you as their constituent from the potential risks.
Sometimes I think this gets painted as environmentalists versus farmers, right? Because a lot of these chemicals are used in farming. But what is the system that we're in where farmers may feel like they don't have a choice, or that they can't get out of this cycle? Is it going to take, I guess, environmentalists and farmers and everybody else to say, hey, we need to figure out a way so that farming can be profitable, but yet not dangerous, not just to the people near the farm, but to the farmers themselves who are spreading these things?
I think you're right. I don't think it needs to be, there should not be an us versus them in this situation. Farmers and everyone, working in the ag industry are equally as exposed, if not more exposed, to a lot of these potential pesticide chemicals than we are as everyday citizens that aren't in that field. So, I've talked with a lot of farmers who are equally, concerned and curious about what they're applying. A lot of them might not even have a full appreciation for the suite of chemicals that are in some of these products that they're buying from the co-ops. So when I talk to farmers and farm groups, it's a lot about, just informing yourself as well, understanding what you're putting on. There also, is certainly an opportunity to use more of an integrated pest management approach, making sure that you actually have the disease, the weed or the insect of concern that you're worried about impacting your yields before you go out and make an application. There's, there's some mentality around there about, doing a Band-Aid ahead of time, that insurance by putting it out there so that you don't have those insects. But there's a lot of farmers who are really taking this a lot more seriously and are working harder. It does take more effort to be able to do the scouting to identify if you have concerns before applying pesticides, but there's a number out there who are interested in doing exactly that.
I know, when we look at solutions for these things, we look to our state government potentially. It was the state legislature back in 1970 that passed that ban. And it's hard to, sitting here right now in 2025, thinking of our state legislature, to imagine them agreeing on much of anything, especially when it comes to passing a chemical ban. How important is it that farmers become a voice in this kind of concern? Because I think most lawmakers will listen to farmers. They are kind of like the iconic Wisconsin rural folks, people who are who you think about when you think about Wisconsin. How important is it for those voices to kind of start coming together like that?
It's going to be really important for the entirety of the ag community to come together to decide what's best for their industry and what we need to be doing to protect ourselves and them, as well as just as citizens in the state. So I think that there's a real opportunity for agricultural producers to come together to identify what are their priorities, how can they rise to the moment, to just recognize that there are a lot more people concerned out there about what's in their food, what's being applied to it, and what they're therefore consuming, and just take that consumer demand more seriously. I think the markets are driving that too. There's just a lot more interest by food producers, food production companies, to understand where there's where their food is grown, how it's being grown, and supporting more sustainable agricultural systems that reduce the amount of inputs. We're never going to get to a position where pesticides aren't needed. I mean, there will always be a need for some level of pesticide out there if we're going to continue to grow the volumes of food that are necessary today and will continue to be to feed the world. So I'm not Pollyanna about that recognition, but I think that there is an opportunity to strike the right balance. And there's also a number of studies going on right now in our state and in our region to really take a closer look at the correlation between exposure to pesticides and other agricultural chemicals like nitrates and health implications based on the degree of exposure. So I also think that over the next several years, as some of the science is ongoing and then released, there'll just be a lot more information out there to inform our policies and help inform us as citizens so that we can be asking the right things of our legislature to be able to create that right balance between what's needed for a productive agricultural industry in the state while balancing that with public health.
I know Clean Wisconsin's going to be doing some of that research ourselves too, especially when it comes to nitrates in drinking water. So I think when you think about all this, the sort of like mixture of toxic pesticides that could be on our food, and it is eating season, by the way, holidays. So if people are just like, well, I just want to protect myself, what can they do both in terms of their fruits and vegetables and also in terms of their drinking water?
Sure. Well, when it comes to fruits and vegetables, if you want to get away from the potential for chemicals for the most part, entirely organic produce and organic food options are really the way to go. There is a rigorous certification program around organic production that is required to demonstrate that your crop is free of those kinds of chemical inputs. So if you want it all the way out, that's where you need to go. Certainly buying local, buying from your community supported agriculture, it has other great options because they're also very transparent about what they're using on the food that they're producing for you. So looking local is always a great idea there as well. If you're interested in, doing a little bit more proactively to protect yourself, the Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection has a program called Drift Watch and Bee Watch. So if you're a beehive owner and you're concerned about pesticides that are being applied in and around your beehives, you can sign up for that program to understand what is being applied near you, at least. So it's an information opportunity. Drift Watch is the same thing. So if you are an organic agriculture producer, you want to be more informed about what's being applied in and around the non-organic fields around you, you can sign up for that. As homeowners, we can sign up for the landscape registry at DACCAP, and that is an ability for you to be informed about what lawn care services might be applying to neighboring properties and that kind of thing. So it's not entirely proactive. You can't stop those applications from happening, but it is a great tool to really have a better understanding of what's happening in and around your area that you might not otherwise be aware of, and just be more informed.
Well, as we say, knowledge is power, so that's like really the first step. I know Clean Wisconsin's doing a lot. You're always meeting with farmers. You're always working on these issues. What is happening right now that we should be paying attention to?
Well, there's a lot of potential. There's a lot of bills out there right now that are floating this legislative session. One is on water testing, that would allow a grant program so that we can all test private well owners can have a cost savings on testing their water to understand what contaminants may be in their groundwater system. There's also a bill right now that's being proposed to ban the use of a certain type of pesticide in household uses. There's a group of pesticides called neonics that I know we've also done some podcasts on, and that bill has a little benefit around that. However, recognizing agriculture uses of neonics is the biggest component. It's hard to tell exactly how effective that would be, but it is really, I'm optimistic seeing that there is more attention being paid to a lot of these agricultural chemical related areas. Similarly, there's a pollinator package of bills out there that would allow local units of government from banning certain types of pesticide uses and just allow for more authority that doesn't currently exist now for local decision making on the use of pesticides.
So a lot of work happening, and I think maybe some opportunities for people who are concerned about these issues to be a part of some of the solutions.
That's very true. There's one more bill I neglected to include that is called the Water Pollution Notification Act. And this is a bill that would require the Department of Natural Resources to inform county health departments and county land conservation departments when a groundwater standard is exceeded. So when a contaminant is found in a groundwater sample that exceeds the health-based standard, this information chain would be initiated. And so by county health departments and county land conservation departments knowing more about where groundwater exceedances are happening, there's an opportunity there to do a better job at the local level of informing other potential contaminated well owners and doing more proactively to address the source of that contamination.
So when the time is right, we'll have action alerts and other pieces of information on our website related to some of these things. Sara Walling, Water and Agriculture Program Director at Clean Wisconsin, thank you so much for taking the time to talk about all this. And, we shouldn't lose hope, I would say. You have to kind of fight for what you want.
Absolutely. Thanks for bringing this to the attention of all of our listeners.
And thank you for listening to the Defender podcast. We have lots of resources about pesticides and PFAS and the health impacts of nitrates and more. These are issues Clean Wisconsin has been working on for a long, long time. So check out the show notes or head to cleanwisconsin.org. I'm Amy Barrilleaux. Talk to you later.